Hello from the BBC World Service and welcome to the latest edition of the Documentary Podcast. Every week we bring you a range of stories from our presenters and reporters across the world. If you have the time, please rate the documentary on your podcast app and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think.
I know that I need to be the man for my son. I know I need to be the man. And when I was at home, I was the man. When I went back out to work, I used the opioids to get through.
Life in the Appalachians used to be simpler for men. But here and across America, men are going through profound changes. I'm Tim Samuels for the BBC World Service. And these are changes I've been writing about for a while, arguing that for men who aren't the privileged or dominant ones at the top, these are actually tough and confusing times to be a man, and that's having serious consequences for all of us. The BBC set me off to investigate, but months into this investigation, a shockwave hit, triggered by accusations against one of Hollywood's most powerful figures that's unleashed a reckoning for abusive men across the country and upended gender relations. With these events unfolding, my exploration into the state of men and masculinity across the world moves this episode from Nigeria to North Carolina in the US, gauging what men and women really think at this pivotal time. A time in which male power is at last openly being called into question. But amongst many ordinary men living paycheck to paycheck, it's also seen as a period of restless uncertainty, frustration, self-destructive behaviour, an appetite for more radical macho politics, and the loss of once solid identities. What are the expectations to be a man?
You know, to have a home and raise your family and keep clothes on their back and keep food on the table, you know.
And do you think guys felt that they were fulfilling that role?
I think a lot of the times why they stayed messed up all the time is because they're more or less ashamed of themselves because they wasn't fulfilling, they wasn't providing for their kids.
North Carolina feels like a good place to take the pulse of men and the wider cultural battles being played out in today's America. In Trump's America. A southern state with liberal enclaves, tainted by economic uncertainty, in the heart of the US's opioid crisis.
All my life, I have tried to uphold other people's expectations and be the man that they think I should be. I had a buildup of a lot of things that I couldn't talk to anyone about, personal issues, and I crushed up this little blue pill. You put something in your head and boom. I didn't know that your mind could switch that fast. Nothing seems to bother me anymore. It went from a toy to a tool.
To understand the seismic shifts men are going through, there's a particular argument that's put forward. Whether you accept it or not, it's worth bearing in mind given what we're all going through, men and women. It goes something like this. Across all species, males are overrepresented at the top and the bottom. Males are both more dominant at the top, yet more self-destructive and likely to hit rock bottom. So men have been overrepresented in boardrooms, governments and Nobel Prizes, yet also way outnumber women when it comes to prison, suicide, homelessness, and yes, the current opioid crisis. Men can win big or seriously crash. How do you reconcile these traits? What's going on in today's American male psyche?
It's hard to paint men as victims. We see men a certain way, which for the most part is justified. Men control every aspect of our society. They define cultural norms through the power that they've enjoyed over centuries and decades.
Haida Verreich is a clinical researcher and cardiology fellow at Duke University Medical Center in Durham, North Carolina. It's long been the case that men and women are living longer than ever before, though women still outlive men by an average of 5 years in the US. It's a fundamental evolution that we're getting healthier in the West, but one that's under threat from male self-destructiveness.
I think this stereotype of what it means to be a man is at the heart of much of what we see. Men with depression are less likely to seek help from a psychiatrist. Men are less likely to see a physician than women are. If you look at deaths in middle age, more people die of opioids than they do of gunshots or road traffic accidents. Opioids kill more people today than the HIV epidemic ever did.
So we've had this historical growth of men living longer, and then that historical phenomenon has reversed, and middle-aged men are not living as long as they used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we don't know where this is going to go, but I think we need to really pay attention to this before we fall behind. I think men as a group haven't advocated for their health. Many times the first time a man visits a doctor is when they're in the emergency room with a heart attack. The economy is changing. Economic productivity was, for many people, related to how strong they were, how active they were, how well could they till the farms. And now we're moving towards an economy in which those physical attributes don't have the same type of value.
Men's identity, belonging and self-esteem can be so closely tied to their work. In North Carolina, traditional blue-collar work has been in ever-diminishing supply. The state has lost 300,000 textile and apparel jobs in the last 30 years. Industries and plants have shuttered. Jobs have been lost or downsized. The door closed to earning high salaries without having a college degree. All most keenly felt in the rural and mountainous towns.
I've done a little bit of traveling, but not much. I mean, I've got a lot of family around who live on some farms who, rarely leave the state. And that's a tradition that you were used to. You look at my generation now, millennials are really just kind of packing into the largest cities, and they don't have that connection of family, connection of place that they used to have. And so when you're a community that's left on the losing end of that, it's an interesting dynamic.
Mike Cooper, a local lawyer, shows me around North Wilkesboro, a small town close to the Blue Ridge Mountains. We pass a huge chicken processing plant. There used to be more notable claims to fame around here.
We're right at the foothills, kind of where the Bible Belt meets Appalachia.
Coming up to the abandoned NASCAR track.
Right, and it was one of the first, and then they met again in Daytona. So Daytona gets all the credit, but the first meeting was here, and that's something people take pride in. But then we lost it.
Gentlemen, start your engines! Let her roll! And so for the final time, the command has been given to the NASCAR Winston Cup drivers. What began in 1949 ends today at this 5/8 mile speedway known as North Wilkesboro.
The folks who had run it at one point, one of the main guys had died, and then when he died, there was a struggle for control. An outsider bought it, so he owned the track, and he sold the race, and we lost the race. This was the focal point of a culture, and then it got taken away from folks, like I said, by an outsider, and folks couldn't stop that.
What would NASCAR have meant to people around here?
For rural Southerners, it's the NFL. It's a matter of pride. One of the things that's really happened here is that when the factories left, the dollar stores came in, folks didn't have a way of influencing that. They didn't have control to their economy, to their society, to their families. My town was a factory town. We had the biggest furniture factories, biggest textile factories in the United States.
In this small town?
Yeah. So when you're a young guy and you're working class and you lose that, you go from being the pride of society to not having a place, not knowing what your identity is.
We've recently had the whole Confederate statue, red hot politics. How would that play out around here?
You grow up here, you see a lot of Confederate imagery. I mean, I represented a guy in court today who had a T-shirt that was Leonard Skinner with the rebel flag on it. And, I don't see him as being this, hateful, racist guy. he's looking for some kind of connection to something is tough, because for a lot of folks, that's the only thing they've been given. They've been given Confederate monument in Town Square, whereas this monument over here, the NASCAR track, is falling into disrepair. You turn to other things, whether that's drugs or dependency or what have you, you lose some sort of respect for yourself and control over what's going on around you. In 2007, we had the third highest drug overdose rate in the United States. That's a socioeconomic disaster that's going on, and you can't stop it. That's part of what happened in the last election. They didn't think anybody else could help them.
How close to home has the self-destructive behaviour hit, the drugs, the opioids?
You know, I grew up, went to nearby Appalachian State University. We partied in college, and then because the drugs were so prevalent here, we experimented with them, and my best friend went to rehab for 2 years in Georgia. And I was addicted for a while. Quit cold turkey in 2011, and that was the hardest thing I've ever done. That was during law school. So that was part of my reason for coming back. And I go into court in the morning every day and see the faces of childhood friends. And, you know, I'm representing them. That issue has been around out here for 10 years, like I said, 2007. And people only started talking about it nationally like 2 years ago. And when people in New York look at it, they think these are all angry, racist bigots. But these are people who legitimately feel like they got screwed.
You don't grow up wanting to be a heroin addict. You really don't know what you're getting into until it's too late. You wake up one day and you're like, I can't tie my shoes.
A 2-hour drive southwest through the Blue Ridge Mountains leads to Asheville, one of the more liberal enclaves in North Carolina. But the city and surrounding rural area haven't been immune from the pervasive opioid epidemic. Nearly 4 people a day in the state are killed by opioids.
There was a year I didn't leave the house.
And you
literally did not leave the house.
You were getting drugs delivered.
I would sleep, you know. I would get high to sleep. I would get high just to eat. I really didn't eat much in that 8 months.
John could have been tucked away in these statistics. An addict for a number of years, I met him in Asheville. He now works as an admissions advisor for Next Step Recovery, which helps men with substance use disorders.
Well, my father died when I was 16. You know, he tried to teach me as much about being a man then as he could, but, you know, a crash course in being a man. Terrible life being out there. One that I thought I deserved. And
why did you feel you deserved that life?
I don't know. Now, when I look back at it, I really don't know.
First, physicians started prescribing too many opioids. And the reason that they started prescribing too many opioids, in my opinion, is because the pharmaceutical industry told us that they were safe. We're really feeling that right now, the brunt of that in Western North Carolina.
Dr. Blake Fagan sits alongside John. He's the Assistant Director at the Family Medicine Residency Programme at Asheville's Mountain Area Health Education Centre, and someone who early on spotted the warning signs of an epidemic brewing.
It cuts all socioeconomic classes. So I have people that are very, very poor, but some of the folks that we've been losing recently, they have everything, and they're addicted and dying.
It's a crisis that was rooted in an overprescription of painkillers that's morphing into more of a heroin problem now. It cuts across the social spectrum, but men are twice as likely to die of an opioid overdose in the US, according to data released by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention.
So there is something about a risk-taking propensity to the male. If you're in an isolated situation where you don't have a lot of opportunities to take risks, but drugs are readily available, that's the risk you take. I think a lot of people are realizing that their life is not going to be as good as their parents had it. And if you don't have a lot of hope, I think you look for escape.
Knowing you're not going to do better than your father. Things which weigh heavy on a man's self-esteem. Things he might want to escape from. To get a sense of how these age-old pressures play out in today's economy, I headed to the tiny town of Burnsville in Yancey County. With the Appalachian Mountains peek over the top of a picture postcard town square. Just off the square, I met Tim, who brings the perspective of someone who spent years working to shake addiction.
Basically, I've lived here all my life. Like I say, I got the mountain heritage and didn't really have a father figure to steer me away, you know. With any kids, when they've got time on their hands and they can get into trouble, and trouble's there, you know, it's not hard to do. My mom raised me, and she had to work all the time, so she done the best she could, you know, but just got off on the wrong foot. I think I smoked my first joint when I was like in the 5th grade.
How old's that?
11.
Oh yeah, the world's turned upside down.
What are the expectations to be a man?
To have a home and raise your family and keep clothes on their back and keep food on the table, you know.
And do you think guys felt that they were fulfilling that role?
I think a lot of the times why they stayed messed up all the time is because they're more or less ashamed of themselves because they wasn't fulfilling, they wasn't providing for their kids.
If you look at the guys you grew up with, what are they generally doing now?
The ones that are still alive, they're drunks, but most of them's dead.
Like Tim's story, his dad wasn't around. This is tobacco country, so they're mining and they're inhaling. None of those dads lived very long. They all died in their 40s and 50s, leaving these teenage boys.
We're sat outside the integrative medical surgery of Dr. Kelly Roth. She's the doctor who's been working with Tim for the past decade.
So Tim was really loved by his mom, but even if the dads are present, the dads don't show love here. I mean, that's just not part of the culture. You know, like he said, you grow up, you get a house, you get a job, you raise a family, or you're not worth anything. Hard, too. I mean, there are some dads that aren't working, but a lot of these dads are working very hard. Their moms are all working 2 jobs trying to raise them. Tim's mom, like a lot of the moms around here, wore themselves out.
Mom was the greatest. When she died, I went off the deep end. She had a life insurance policy, and I got like $50,000, and that's the last thing I needed at that time. I went out and bought me a Corvette, and I'm out running up and down the roads, just didn't care, doing coke, waking up, people waking me up, and I even run the law one time. They chased me over through Tennessee, there at the top of the mountain, back through Ball Creek, down Cane River, back out of Cane River, back out Ball Creek, 17 highway patrol, and I finally run out of gas in no car. They dragged me out and beat on me pretty bad, and I had the money to make my bail, but I didn't want to get out. When they caught me, I was kind of like, man, it's finally over with, you know. I said, that's it, you know, I'm dropping it all, and Kelly was good enough to take me on.
Men on their downers or feeling threatened can spectacularly self-destruct. But they can also be deeply destructive to others. Abuse, violence, enmity to outsiders, and mass shootings.
Do you have the call at Snowman Douglas for the shooter? For a shooter? Stating that there's an active shooter in the school.
Almost always carried out by men, white men, who own 60% of the guns in the US.
Yes, the 1200 building, they heard shots.
They heard, and how many shots did they hear?
Over towards Winston-Salem, the 5th biggest city in North Carolina, merely objecting to a giant billboard by the road can unleash venomous male bile.
It was a billboard outside of Kernersville, North Carolina, coming into Winston-Salem.
Real men provide, real women appreciate it, spelled out boldly on the side of Business 40 in Forsyth County.
Molly Grace, a local business owner, came across the sign early last year.
And then I went and drove out and saw it myself. And it was, real men provide, real women appreciate it. I parked on the road that was behind it and walked up to the billboard and sat in the grass underneath it and was just like, why would someone do this?
But rather than just sit in the long grass and look up at the sign, what was your next move?
I went on Facebook, I posted a photo of it, and I was just like, there will be a protest, join me.
But pretty quickly, the backlash kicked in.
Started with just general people commenting negatively, which is natural. And then I started getting phone calls. You probably voted for Hillary, you liberal snowflake. Some were really nasty. Someone being like, hey, is this Molly Grace? And I'd be like, yes, it is. And they'd be like, I'm going to kill you. I still get them, actually.
How long ago?
It was a year this week.
Why do you think a year later it's still driving people to come and harass you and send you death threats?
These are people who don't want women to be equal, and they're angry. There are people that are dedicating so much time and effort to try to humiliate a woman.
What toll has it taken on you?
It's really upsetting. It's totally frightened me, and I hate saying that, but it worked. All of this over and over and over again has made me never want to do something like that again. They've made me go crazy, it worked. Yeah, so the other side of this is that at the same time, I'm super excited. It's such an exciting time to be alive, and I have been waiting for this since I was a little girl. It's amazing, this Me Too movement. It's amazing, this Time's Up situation. I can't think of a better time for me to be alive right now. I'm so happy that it's happening.
But without suggesting that you might have sympathy for these guys, do you think that some men are having a hard time of things at the moment?
I don't know that sympathy is the word, but I do understand where a lot of this psychological conditioning has come from. I don't accept it, but I do get why a lot of these men have probably been raised to think a certain way. I mean, there's a lot of things that have gone into creating toxic masculinity. I don't think it is their fault. However, they can still be held accountable.
Next, I'll try to peel away more layers of the modern male experience. Looking at racial divides, the far right, and how not to be a pickup artist.
The documentary is just one of our BBC World Service podcasts. There are many others to choose from. In November 1970, a woman's body was discovered in a remote valley in Norway. All the labels had been removed from her clothes. Disguises were discovered in her suitcases. All these years on, her identity remains a mystery. Our brand new podcast from the BBC World Service and Norway's NRK is investigating the case. We have given you a bonus episode this week, previewing the series. To download and listen, search for Death in Ice Valley wherever you find your podcasts. Now, let's return to the documentary.
In North Carolina, in the southeast of the United States, I'm Tim Samuels, delving into some of the complexities and contradictions of being a man at this pivotal moment in gender relations for a 3-part series for the BBC World Service. It's fair to say this wasn't one of our broadcasts.
Women primarily fulfill the role of sex at this point in our lives.
Right.
There might be a time where we start to gear our social lives and our sexual lives towards one person as we get older. It makes me realize what women are to me and what they can be to me.
Well, because we've lived our lives under this illusion that they're going to be so much more, and they're not.
Yeah. Yeah, and also at the same time, we're still looking for women that are really amazing as well as hot.
Yeah.
Right.
Two young guys, Jared and Jacob, ran a popular coffee shop in Asheville. They also dished up, on the side, a podcast that talked about their dating experiences and sexual encounters, and offered advice to less successful guys on how to pick up women. All with some disturbing attitudes to women who were described as plates to be kept spinning.
And so, at the start of the year, I plowed through a bunch of girls real quickly. And I think I was excited about getting some new plates spinning. And I was like, I'm going to develop some new stuff.
We both went through a fairly compulsive phase where we were just like, yeah, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And every single week started to be like when we would sit around and count up our points, you know?
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
But it is
you
ego.
know? And it's fun to do, but at the same time, after you do that for a while, you get really burnt out.
When the misogynist, lewd recordings came to light, locals were outraged, and Asheville soon had one less coffee shop.
I was really, really angry when it came out, and I was reading all of the blog and looking at it. People were protesting outside. I only lived a few blocks away.
Tony Sherwood lived in Asheville and went on to write a play about the podcast Fallout in 2015. It all tapped into male behaviour she'd seen before.
I was a trader on the trading floor in Chicago, one of the very, very few women there. And I had to listen to the kind of stuff that these guys put on their podcast to my face all the time. I mean, I heard all about the bachelor parties, and I heard all about the prostitutes, and I knew people were cheating on their wives, and they were very open about it there in the pit. And what irritated me so much is that it had gotten new energy from the internet. It had built into this huge community. It was no longer just some guy you had to see at work, every day. It was like, these people are everywhere, and who are they?
With the passage of time, have you any sympathy for those guys?
Yes, I really do. I do. I'm still angry at them, but they were hurt somewhere along the line. I think they were looking for sort of a method to get women. And I can understand how, if you're given a method that seems to work, that you might want to use it. It's somewhat desperate. They're trying to prove to other men. It's not proving anything to women. It's really men relating to other men this way.
The episode in Asheville feels like a minor precursor to the wider movement that's taken hold in the US and beyond. The Me Too and Time Up movements, the dozens of powerful men toppled from their positions, a sense that a line has been drawn by women. The podcasters, Jared and Jacob, didn't want to speak publicly. One privately expressed a desire for some sort of redemption. In Asheville, we did find a new coffee shop, run by one of their former employees, Sarah.
I was really shocked, very confused, because a lot of it was personal friends of mine. Asheville's a really small city, so...
Was there a bit of you which sort of thought, well, okay, this is guys being guys?
No. Not at all.
They don't mean this.
No. I don't want to ever be associated with people who think this way about women. I wasn't a huge fan of the way that they communicated with women in the coffee shop, but I had no idea that it was this whole different world of thinking that there was a way to play women. There's no way to rationalize, it's just guys being guys.
You seem quite young. How old are you?
I'm 24.
At college, was there a frat community there?
Oh, no.
Was it more about safe spaces?
Yes. Well, I think a lot of it was a safe space to talk about gender and what that meant for people.
I mean, if you were at a party with other students, was it normal or not, if there's sexual action going on, to explicitly say, do I have your consent to do this?
From my social group, that became something that was understood, that you ask and communicate on every level like that.
Every level of physical activity?
Yes. Is it okay if I give you a hug? That's something in Asheville. Everyone wants to hug each other. You learn to ask, are you comfortable with hugs before you hug someone? Because you never know what someone's lived experience is and how that might trigger that person.
That's a good thing for you?
I think it's a beautiful thing, because ask before you touch someone in general.
Having to ask permission before hugging a fellow student, it seems a million miles away from the rough and tumble of my university days in Scotland. But gender, sex and consent are now a big deal on today's campuses. part of the shifting cultural front line. In Raleigh, hundreds of students congregate ahead of cheering on the NC State American football team. Perched around their trucks, drinking beer, barbecues on the go. I wondered how some of them viewed the question of consent.
And so what are the girls like at these parties?
How PC do we have to be? When they show up, it's like they're drunk. There's action in every corner. Nobody walks home alone.
If girls are really drunk and consensual.
I don't want to give you the wrong idea because we are respectful with girls. Like, if a girl's too drunk, she's just too drunk.
Have you been told what you're meant to do about consent?
Oh, of course.
Better safe than sorry. You always have to make sure that everyone is on the same page and that what is happening is not because you're intoxicated.
Is it cool if I stick it in? Is it cool if I... Yeah, it's cool if I stick it in. Boom. Consent. They disproportionately kind of train us on that.
But I guess some really bad things have happened at fraternities over the years.
Yeah, no, you're right. Not ours, but...
Do you have safe spaces on campus?
I don't know. We put a safe space sticker on my door as a joke. I don't understand why you need a safe space. Come on now.
Safe spaces, which prohibit any behaviour or talk that could cause offence, like so many a gender and cultural issue in the US, are politicised. One woman, or man, or gender non-specific's right to not be offended is another's encroachment of right-stripping liberalism.
Major General Gregory Luck.
Safe spaces and red meat Republicans tend not to go hand in hand, but an American football game is a good place to find a local political operative.
As you stand here with your cigar and football jersey on, this is Dallas at Peak Man.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And I'm going to go eat some eggs and bacon and grits here in a minute, so yep.
On his way into the stadium, I caught up with Dallas Woodhouse, executive director of the North Carolina Republican Party.
Obama was a terrible president in my opinion, but he was good for the Republican Party. Trump won by a pretty healthy margin. The job markets have been hard, but we're coming back. Our rural areas are struggling in some ways. They are much better than they were.
How much anger and frustration amongst men living in the rural parts of the state?
I think there's frustration, but we have a real pull yourself up by your bootstraps and fix your situation. Go get another job, go get better educated, do the things you need to do to be successful.
Was there a particular appeal amongst men towards Donald Trump?
Well, yeah, Republicans win men overwhelmingly anyway. The identity politics of the other party has not played very well. One reason Trump won is some of this ridiculous political correctness here.
The deep cultural fissures, the identity politics that divide the nation, neatly play out in North Carolina, a swing state that's home to liberal-leaning, economically sound cities like Charlotte, Durham, Greensboro and Raleigh, together with rural areas depressed by the collapse in tobacco, textiles and manufacturing. The cultural fault line between the liberal and less politically correct North Carolinas was brought to a very public head over bathrooms, and a bill that would have stopped transgender people from using the toilets they wanted, which ended up being dropped after major businesses, entertainers and sports teams threatened to boycott the state. Donald Trump won 72% of the vote of white men living in rural areas and carried the white female vote. More broadly, there seems to be a sense in which the right and far right are harvesting this male restlessness and search for identity. Groups like the Proud Boys have sprung up, a male-only, polo shirt-wearing, far-right organisation that's unashamedly pro-Western. Over a coffee in Raleigh, I met Kevin Cormier, a member, though he doesn't speak for the group. He joined the army after 9/11, served in Iraq as a nurse, returned with PTSD and back injuries, became addicted to opioids, hung out with communists, married a woman from Central America, yet now feels at home on the far right.
Well, we see a lot of men nowadays who don't have a lot of purpose in life. I think a lot of those people turn to the right.
What is the plight of the American male at the moment?
I think they haven't faced enough adversity. They lack a drive to go out and create things.
You're sort of saying men have become too soft?
Definitely in a way, yes. Not just soft physically, but soft emotionally. I think that they're very coddled and spoiled. I don't think that they're given enough encouragement to go outside of the university to find career paths, outside of this cookie-cutter existence.
Serving in Iraq left you pretty mentally scarred and some pretty serious repercussions. Do you wish you'd never gone?
No, I would go again tomorrow if they asked. It was all about, for me, the camaraderie, the adventure. It was the best experience of my life.
What was the particular attraction of joining Proud Boys?
For me, it was that male camaraderie. Finding men who have had similar hardships, adversities, who believed in traditional values and saw the benefit of those values. I think men want to see other men succeed. They want to be part of something that is considered winning, and they want to be dominant. And that's something that I think a lot of men try to repress now, and it's not very healthy.
So do you look at Trump and think that's a guy I can relate to?
Trump says what he's thinking. I think for a long time, Americans bit their tongue. We let things happen that were not beneficial to our society. Trump is the hand grenade that traditional Americans want.
What all Americans want? Well, we'll see. You can't get to grips with the male experience in North Carolina without addressing another simmering fault line that cuts across the nation: race. Poverty, policing, opportunities to advance are all tinged with a racial hue. Charlotte might be home to the nation's second largest financial services sector, but the wealth isn't being spread around equally. 70% of black households make less than $60,000 a year, while almost 60% of white ones make more than that. Poverty and its effects are tangible.
This is my casual look. I wore a suit each and every day, and I never wore a blazer and slacks.
In the north of the city, I met Gary McFadden, a retired homicide detective. When he was a young cop in the late 80s, driving a red Corvette, there'd have been something of the Miami Vice about Gary.
Cuff shirts and start shirts, never anything less.
And who taught you that?
Fathers and grandfathers. I wanted to shine my shoes. I wanted to see the lining in my pants. Why? Because they had it. Those conversations boys and men need. I was in the police department for 30 years, and I worked in investigations for 27 years, and I did homicides for 22 years. Okay, we're on what they call the Ford, called Beatty's Ford Road. Heavily African-American populated area. We have a store over here called Mighty Midget Mark. That store has seen 10 or 15 homicides. I've worked at least 3 at that store, even when the store owner had to shoot and take someone's life doing a robbery. Across the street, there were so many murders on that street, and in that area, they changed the name of the street because it was that bad.
On a basic level, what's it like for a young guy to grow up around somewhere like here?
It's very tough. One young man said something at a forum the other day, in my mind, I have been in prison since I've been 5 years old because of the environment that I grew up in. So over here, it's a challenge. It's a tough challenge. But there's a lot of good people come out of this area. You know, we are not committed to giving it attention. A lot of people like to put the bandage on it.
Crime, and violent crime especially, has tended to be the kind of domain of men, boys and men. But are the causes of crime and violence amongst boys and men today essentially the same as when you first started out?
Yes. It is called respect. You don't respect me, that has a lot to do with it. If you disrespected me, I need to check you.
How does a young guy prove himself to make that transition from boy to manhood around here?
In here, you're going to be the guy who's the big guy. As they say, I pop bottles means that when I go to the club, everybody respects me because of the image that I have. Now, to prove yourself in the illegal world, you're going to have to shoot somebody. You're going to have to make people scared of you. You're going to have to make people frightened of you. And to them, that's being a man, but it's not. When I go to these schools, most of these boys have been in trouble. All they want is somebody to care for them, somebody to show them some love. Maybe they don't want to say love, and give them some self-worth. Show them the struggles that you go through every day to become a man. He needs to see a man working. He needs to see a man providing at home. He needs to see the man making decisions at home. He needs to see a man caring for his mother, because he needs that to emulate what he's going to do in life. We don't give them the platform for them to voice their opinions. Most of the riots and demonstrations throughout America are people who are just angry. But you never ask them, why are they angry?
We are continuing to follow this breaking news out of North Charlotte, the University City area. There was a police-involved shooting earlier today where CMPD shot and killed a man, a 43-year-old man. They say he was armed. They say they were in imminent danger, and the family of that man says that's not true.
Well, it came to the head with shooting of Mr. Scott.
Don't shoot, hands up! Don't shoot, hands up! Black lives do matter, bro. That's why we out here.
In 2016, Keith Lamont Scott, a 43-year-old African-American man, was shot dead by police in Charlotte.
People got very angry.
It's time to rise up and understand what's going on in this world.
The shooting sparked both peaceful protests and violent riots in Charlotte over several nights.
And then it got to the point where they started breaking windows, damaging property, and then had a 2 or 3 day riots downtown in Charlotte.
We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright.
Greg Jackson, a rapper and a sous chef, decided to march to the police station.
There was a silent protest going on. I looked at one of my rap friends, Mo Crane, and I looked at him and I said, hey, I'm going to the police headquarters.
Where he was confronted with ex-cop Gary McFadden.
So I just went out and just stood for a moment and didn't say anything. And we got into a heated 2.5 hour discussion.
Hey, you, excuse me, who do you think you are? What are you doing? Why do you think this is right? And you're black. And he asked us 3 questions, man.
Do you know what justice looked like?
We said no.
Do you know how to find justice?
We said no again.
And do you know justice when you see it?
Told him no again. And these 3 questions changed our lives.
We gon' be alright.
The questions which sparked an unusual friendship and a working partnership. Greg, the rapper, began training the police on how to communicate with the community, whilst Gary helped Greg set up a local organisation called Heal Charlotte.
So this is Tyran.
I like chicken nuggets.
He wants to tell everybody that this is Janiyah. Gets herself ready for school.
I met Greg in the northeast of the city, along with a dozen or so young kids, in a community centre that sits in the heart of their estate.
So we can show what happened, what was your ups, what was your downs. Tyran, don't say you like chicken nuggets no more.
I like chicken nuggets.
This is a 3-hour safe haven for these kids to be kids. In the urban society, you take on this adult mentality so early. By the time you're 11, you already believe you're grown.
Do you find amongst the young boys that you have here, there's a need to prove themselves as transitioning to becoming men?
The boys are in survival mode by the time that they're 11. So they're basically looking for guidance because they're sponges. So they're going to take whatever looks cool and whatever you made look cool to them. When you're young and you see your mother struggling or you see your grandma struggling, you're not dreaming for yourself in this urban society. You are dreaming to get your whole household out of a situation. Somebody told me the black dollar moves backwards in America. When you're a young man that made it successful, you go back and you get your mom, you get your dad, you get your aunt, you get your uncle, you get them out the hood.
You're from where originally?
I'm from the Bronx, New York.
Yeah. And is it fair to say you've had a few scrapes along the way?
I've had some beautiful souls that have been able to mentor me, and then I've been able to see the other side of it. My dad was selling crack cocaine in New York. That was one of my first interactions with learning how to sell drugs, and I actually caught my first case when I was about 15, caught up in the Bronx, New York, where I got caught for selling crack, and I had to do a year on Rikers Island, which is one of the hardest jails in America. My mom was the only person that visited me while I was in jail.
I should probably ask your mum then, what was, how much of a handful was Greg as a kid?
Tell the truth, Mom.
Are you sure?
Go ahead, tell the truth.
Yeah, well, actually, he was a great student. This is before he hit 13 years old. But he was always, got a little difficult.
I guess it just goes to show that if the dad's not around, it's hard to keep a young boy on the right path.
No, when a father is not in the home, that is not natural. You know, single, raising children, particularly males, so you gotta take that hard voice and then there's a space that's empty. There's a space of a missing male. So if you're a male child, you naturally navigate into it.
It must have been heartbreaking when Greg ended up in jail.
It's a pain that is familiar. When I turned 13 or 14, I said, I'm not going to no more funerals. I'm tired of seeing brothers, friends with swollen heads because they've been shot in the head. I don't want to see another one.
That American dream isn't sold to the hood. We get a ceiling on our dreams. Our ceiling and our expectations don't go as high as they should go. And that's what we're creating here.
Something good about school is that in math I got 100 on my test.
No child is coming up not believing they can't be anything.
I like school. Gonna have fun in my school while I play games.
They take what society gives them and then they put their own ceiling on themselves.
I got a 95 on my test.
It's what they see, it's what they hear, it's what they listen to, and that's what they start to embody.
And what I like is chicken nuggets. Done. Mic drop. A mic drop.
Masculinity intersects with so many aspects of life. The pressures to be a man, whatever they may be, seem to add fuel to the stark fault lines that already cross America. But it's men's relationships with women that have perhaps undergone the biggest reshaping in this last year. The world feels a very different place for men than before Harvey Weinstein became known for the wrong reasons. If it's far from simple being a man today, how do we now look to women? Something I put to Soraya Shamali, the director of the Women's Media Centre's Speech Project in Washington, D.C.
So I think what I see is a fair amount of confusion. Ideals of masculinity have been stubbornly resistant to change over time. Girls have a lot more leeway to experiment in childhood. Rarely are they penalized for taking on masculine attributes. But boys are not. Boys are just held to much, much higher and stricter standards, particularly by other boys and men.
One thing I've noticed is that when men do feel threatened, when they feel that they're losing something, they're capable of being very self-destructive, as well as destructive to other people around them.
Girls and women are taught to think about emotions except for anger, and boys are excessively taught about anger as an agenic force, like anger as a way to control the environment. We still rely on a construction of masculinity that is built on women's vulnerabilities. The scaffolding, to me, is this notion that men are supposed to provide and protect. When women start providing for themselves, that is a threat to masculinity. When women globally are saying, I am vulnerable in the following ways because of sexual aggression and male sexual entitlement, that too is an affront to individual men's masculinity, because what they are hearing is, wait a minute, I actually can't protect the women around me. I can't protect my wife or my sister or my daughter or my mother. Both the provide and the protect dimensions require female vulnerability. And that is a really, really toxic combination.
It feels like masculinity isn't going to go down without a fight. And I think with the shift in politics to the right in parts of Europe and in the US, is a precursor to what could happen if more men are going to lose their power.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's going to be a bumpy road ahead.
I think it's going to be a very bumpy road ahead. When you see the leader of North Korea and the leader of the United States literally comparing phallic symbols, in all seriousness, all you can do is laugh, otherwise you'll just be enraged all the time. We have all of these factors in society related to class and race and migration, but gender operates at the most intimate levels within families immediately. It operates before any of those other things can really become salient.
If I could only be sure that you love me, baby. even from spending a little time in one state in this vast and divergent country, it strikes me that we underestimate the potency of masculinity and men not feeling like men in this economy at our peril. There are so many consequences for society, politics, foreign policy maybe, and certainly for women. And as we rightly say this is a time to listen to women, let's not forget it pays to try and understand men too. My final leg of this journey into what men really think will take me to Delhi, a city which has seen some shocking assaults against women, yet some men now claim they're becoming the victims.
Thank you for listening. There will be more from the documentary podcast soon. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. And don't forget, do try our other BBC World Service podcasts too.